Queen Camilla believed the final meeting would produce a compromise. Instead, Prince William entered carrying a sealed financial order that left no room for negotiation. With King Charles sitting silently beside him, the future king confirmed that Camilla's independent royal allowance would be reduced, placed under annual review, and stripped of several personal privileges. She did not merely hear a financial decision, she heard a warning that her power inside the monarchy was no longer protected. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. Then her chair scraped backwards as she stared at William and demanded to know whether he understood the insult placed before the queen. The prince did not soften. Her independent allowance would fall by 40%, face annual review, and cover only expenses tied directly to approved royal duties. William kept his voice controlled, but every word carried force. A royal allowance was official funding for duties, staff, travel, and approved household costs, yet this order reached further than a simple cut. Private advisors, wardrobe expansion, unofficial journeys, extra appointments, and hospitality bills would now require separate approval. Her title remained, but her freedom to act without scrutiny had been broken. Charles held the order beside the fireplace and said nothing. Camilla turned toward him, expecting resistance, some sign that her husband had not abandoned her. The king lowered his eyes instead. His silence struck harder than William's announcement, because it revealed that the monarch had known what was coming, and allowed his son to deliver it. The prince explained that the reduction formed part of a wider review into spending, influence, and privately appointed staff surrounding the queen consort. Camilla accused him of treating her household like a threat, but William answered that the review had uncovered expenses approved without clear limits. He did not call them mistakes, he called them warnings. Camilla reached for the document and froze when she saw Charles's initials at the bottom. The king had not merely witnessed the decision. He had approved the framework before William entered Clarence House, the royal residence where the meeting was held. For one breath, outrage gave way to betrayal. William rose, placed a second unopened file on the table, and said the allowance cut was only the first recommendation accepted by the crown, the institution embodied by the sovereign. Then he walked out, leaving Camilla with her silent husband and a sealed warning. Her outrage began with the allowance, but the deeper wound lay in what each person inside that shattered room believed the monarchy still owed them. For Camilla, the allowance was never simply an account filled with royal money. It represented recognition, independence, and the security she believed she had earned after decades of public hostility. For William, however, the same allowance had become a symbol of blurred authority and unchecked privilege. Between them stood Charles, a husband desperate to protect his wife, a king conscious of public judgment, and a father who knew the future of the crown would soon belong to his son. Camilla remained alone after the meeting, staring at the order as though it had changed the meaning of every room around her. She removed her reading glasses, placed them beside the document, and told her private secretary that William had treated her like an employee whose contract could be rewritten without warning. The Queen saw the allowance as proof that she was not temporary, decorative, or dependent. It funded her household, supported her duties, and confirmed that her place beside the king carried real authority. William saw something very different. The prince believed tighter financial control was essential, because the monarchy now relied on fewer working royals, meaning every public expense carried greater weight. A working royal was a family member who performed official duties on behalf of the sovereign, and fewer of them meant greater pressure on those who remained. To the future king, discipline was not cruelty, it was survival. Charles entered later and found Camilla sitting in darkness. She did not rise. She asked why he had signed the framework without warning her, and the king paused before answering. He admitted that he feared she would force him to choose between defending her and protecting the institution before he was ready to face either consequence. Camilla's anger sharpened. She told him he had already chosen by remaining silent. Charles moved closer but did not touch her. The monarch confessed that several financial requests carrying her approval had reached him only after staff had committed the palace to payment. By then, reversing them would have exposed division and embarrassment. William's concern went beyond spending. He believed Camilla's growing network of advisors had begun operating like a second court, a rival circle of influence competing with his own office. A royal court was the group of staff and advisors surrounding a senior royal, and this one had started making decisions before the king fully understood them. Camilla demanded to know which request had finally turned William against her. Charles looked away and refused to answer. That silence revealed more than any confession. One incident remained too damaging to speak aloud, and it would soon become the moment everyone inside the palace recognized as the true point of no return. The allowance dispute did not begin with a spreadsheet, a budget meeting, or William's sudden desire to impose control. It began 6 weeks earlier during a private reception at Windsor Castle, when a celebration intended to honor long-serving royal staff quietly transformed into a display of competing authority. One unsigned payment request, one overheard conversation, and one decision made without Charles's approval created the fracture that would eventually bring Camilla and William face to face across a table. Camilla had planned the Windsor reception as a reward for members of her household, including new advisors, trusted companions, and charitable representatives. Windsor Castle was one of the sovereign's main royal residences, used for official ceremonies, private gatherings, and moments carrying deep institutional weight. The original budget was modest. Then the guest list grew. Entertainment, additional security, private transport, overnight accommodation, wardrobe preparation, and an extended dinner pushed the cost far beyond its first limit. William arrived earlier than expected and heard voices through an adjoining doorway. The prince stopped when Camilla instructed an aide to place a large hospitality bill under the sovereign's official ceremonial budget, instead of her personal allowance. That budget funded events carried out directly for the crown, not private household celebrations. The difference mattered because public money would now cover choices that had never been approved as official duty. William entered the room and asked whether Charles had authorized the transfer. Camilla closed the folder in front of her. She told him the Queen did not require the Prince of Wales to inspect every decision she made. The future king answered that he was not inspecting her title. He was questioning why a private expense had been disguised as a ceremonial obligation. Camilla's face hardened. She accused him of humiliating her in front of staff, while William warned that authority without limits would eventually damage them all. The Queen refused to reverse the instruction. He left without another argument, but the silence between them had already become dangerous. William later examined the accounts with a senior financial officer. The documented review revealed that the reception payment was not an isolated exception. Similar expenses had been hidden under broad categories, making private household costs appear connected to official royal work. 3 authorization sheets carried the same pattern. Charles read the copies in private and went pale when William showed him the final page. The king's approval stamp appeared at the bottom, yet he admitted during their recorded conversation that he had never seen the document before his authorization was added. William understood the crisis could no longer be solved by canceling one payment. He drafted a permanent restriction, knowing it would force Charles to choose between Camilla's anger and the crown's future stability. The hidden accounts explained his decision, but they could not prepare him for what the Queen would say when polite language finally disappeared. Camilla did not allow the decision to settle quietly. Within hours, she summoned William back to Clarence's house and dismissed every aide from the room. The door closed. The careful language of royal duty disappeared with it. What followed was not a disagreement over money, but a furious struggle over legitimacy. One believed she was defending the dignity of the Queen. The other believed he was preventing the crown from being weakened before it became his responsibility. Camilla had demanded the second meeting without secretaries, financial officers, or legal advisors. She believed William would lose some of his certainty once the conflict became personal. Clarence House, the London residence used by the King and Queen, no longer felt like neutral ground. It had become the place where one generation challenged another. Charles initially planned to attend, but she stopped him at the door and insisted that the prince explain the decision directly to her. Camilla remained standing when William entered. She pushed the financial order across the table and said, "You have no right to reduce the Queen to a line in your future budget." Her voice carried anger, but beneath it sat something more painful. She believed the allowance confirmed her place beside Charles. To lose control of it felt like being told that her position could be measured, limited, and quietly downgraded. William refused to raise his voice. He placed both hands on the back of a chair and told her that the title of Queen could not protect spending the sovereign had never knowingly approved. The sovereign was the reigning monarch, the person whose authority gave official force to royal decisions. Charles's name had appeared on documents he had not examined, and the future king would not pretend that such a failure was harmless. Camilla struck back. She accused Catherine's household of influencing the review and suggested the princess wanted her weakened before William inherited the throne. He answered immediately. Catherine had not attended the financial meetings, had not reviewed the accounts, and had not asked for any restriction. The prince warned her not to turn accountability into a personal rivalry. William then delivered the revelation that changed the room. Charles had requested the annual review clause himself, after learning that his authorization had been attached to financial documents he had never seen. The king had not been pressured into accepting that condition. He had asked for it. Camilla's anger suddenly lost its direction. William told her the review would remain, even if Charles later asked him privately to reverse it. Then he walked out. The confrontation was over, but the message remained brutal. Her husband might still be king, yet he no longer possessed the power to restore what had been taken. And beyond that closed door, others had already chosen William's side. William's order carried his name, but it was supported by a quiet coalition formed behind closed doors. Senior financial officers, constitutional advisors, and members of the family had concluded that the monarchy could no longer afford rival households operating without clear limits. Yet the most important support did not come from an accountant or courtier, it came from Charles himself, whose trembling hand had signed the framework after a private conversation forced him to admit that love had begun interfering with responsibility. William now held growing influence over long-term royal planning because his household, future duties, and financial strategy had become central to the monarchy's transition. The transition meant the gradual transfer of responsibility from the current sovereign to the next generation. Every decision made now would shape the crown he would one day inherit. And the prince refused to inherit a system built on hidden exceptions. Princess Anne supported him. She believed public service had to remain separate from private comfort, and she said so during a documented family consultation with Charles. The keeper of the privy purse, the official responsible for managing the monarch's finances, also backed tighter controls, while senior legal advisors warned that unclear approval lines could damage trust far beyond the palace. Anne met Charles alone and placed the disputed authorization sheets before him. She did not accuse Camilla. She did not need to. The princess simply asked whether he could honestly say he had approved every expense carrying his name. Charles read the pages slowly. Then he removed his glasses and admitted that he could not. The king's shame came from more than poor oversight. He understood that his fear of domestic conflict had weakened his judgment as monarch. By avoiding difficult questions at home, he had allowed private loyalty to interfere with public responsibility. Anne then revealed through their recorded conversation that William's first proposal had been temporary. The future king wanted only a short spending freeze while the accounts were reviewed. Charles had secretly asked for something stronger, a permanent annual review that would stop the same pattern from returning. The framework went further still. Exceptional Queen's household expenses would now require approval from a joint panel rather than Charles alone. That panel was a small group of senior financial and legal officials tasked with checking unusual costs before money was released. Camilla could no longer secure additional funding through her husband's signature. When the Queen learned that Anne had supported the measure, her anger widened. William was no longer the only person she blamed. To her, this had become a coordinated move to reduce her influence before the next reign. And as the controls took effect, that suspicion began turning into something far more painful: visible loss inside her own household. The first consequence arrived without ceremony. Invitations were withdrawn, travel plans were suspended, contracts were reopened, and staff members who had assumed their positions were secure suddenly faced private reviews. Camilla had expected the decision to remain a paper restriction, debated by senior royals. Instead, it entered her rooms, her calendar, and her daily routine. Every cancelled arrangement became another reminder that William's order was real, and that no one inside the palace was willing to ignore it. Camilla watched her private secretary remove 2 overseas visits from the official calendar. One journey had combined charitable meetings with several days of private hospitality. The other included personal guests, whose costs could no longer be placed beside royal duty. An official engagement was work carried out publicly on behalf of the crown, and under the new rules, every major expense had to be linked clearly to that purpose before approval. The Queen reached toward the page, then stopped. Her secretary explained that financial staff outside her household had rejected the added costs. Every booking now required written justification in advance, which meant her office could no longer adjust plans quietly after commitments had been made. The restriction mattered because it removed more than money. It removed the freedom to shape her own schedule without outside permission. Camilla's humiliation deepened when a long-serving advisor entered carrying a short letter. His consultancy would not be renewed. She asked him to stay and promised to speak directly with Charles, but he answered that the decision now sat with the joint review panel. The advisor lowered his voice and told her he did not want his loyalty to become another reason for suspicion. Fear spread quickly. Several members of the household began submitting records voluntarily, including travel invoices, hospitality requests, and previous authorization notes. They were not turning against Camilla. They were protecting themselves in case the review uncovered more irregular approvals. The Queen understood the message. Her own staff no longer believed she could shield them. Charles came to her that evening and offered to cover certain private costs from his personal funds. The king spoke gently, hoping the gesture would restore something the order had taken away. Camilla refused. She told him that private charity from her husband would make the humiliation worse, because it would confirm that she no longer controlled anything in her own right. Charles turned toward the door, but she stopped him with one question. Did he still believe she belonged at the center of his reign? The monarch hesitated, only for a moment. Yet that pause broke through every layer of anger she had built. For the first time, Camilla stopped fighting the figures and faced the fear beneath them. Charles could still love her while no longer trusting her power. After days of fury, Camilla did something no advisor expected. She asked Charles to meet her alone, without papers, titles, secretaries, or prepared explanations. They sat together in a small private room where no officials waited outside to record the outcome. The allowance was still reduced. William's decision had not changed. But for the first time since the crisis began, husband and wife spoke not as sovereign and queen, but as two people confronting the damage caused by avoidance. Camilla had finally understood that protocol, household pressure, and Charles's affection would not reverse the order. Protocol meant the formal rules governing royal conduct and authority, but even those rules could not restore power once the king had approved its removal. The Queen could challenge William, blame advisors, or resist the financial review. Yet none of it would change the final decision. For the first time, she stopped searching for a way around it. Charles entered quietly and sat opposite her. The king knew his silence had allowed the crisis to grow. He had approved requests without proper scrutiny, avoided arguments that might disturb their marriage, and allowed personal loyalty to weaken royal responsibility. That failure now threatened both the institution he served and the woman he had tried too hard to protect. Camilla asked whether he had signed the restrictions because he believed she had deliberately misused her position. Charles answered carefully. He did not accuse her of planning deception. He said she had stopped seeing where personal loyalty ended and royal accountability began. The monarch's recorded private account later described that sentence as the moment neither of them could hide from the truth. Camilla lowered her voice and admitted what anger had concealed. The expanding household had made her feel safe. After years of being judged, rejected, compared with the past, and treated as though she could never fully belong, every advisor and privilege had felt like proof that she could not be pushed aside again. The Queen had built influence because she feared losing security. Charles then revealed that William had protected her ceremonial budget. The future king had insisted that official duties, public engagements, staff required for service, and the dignity of her position remain fully funded. A ceremonial budget covered the costs connected directly to formal royal work, meaning her public role would remain intact even while personal freedoms were restricted. Camilla finally saw the difference. William had not designed the order to remove her as queen. He had designed it to separate the crown's obligations from the privileges she had gathered around herself. She agreed not to challenge the decision publicly. Then she asked Charles to arrange one final meeting with William, not to recover the money, but to discover whether respect between them could survive. That private acceptance changed the family's conflict, yet outside the palace, the decision had already escaped into public view. By sunrise, the argument was no longer private. Britain awoke to headlines describing a queen in revolt, an heir imposing discipline, and a king trapped between marriage and monarchy. Television studios debated whether William had acted with courage or cruelty. Crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace, while commentators searched for signs of division in every gesture. Yet the image that defined the crisis was not a shouted confrontation. It was a single newspaper front page showing Camilla alone beneath one devastating word: cut. Camilla unfolded the morning papers at breakfast and stopped at the largest headline. Beneath a photograph of her leaving a recent engagement were the words, "William cuts Queen's private royal allowance." The revised royal expenditure plan had exposed the reduction because it listed major changes to household funding. That plan was the official record, explaining how money would be distributed across royal duties, staff, travel, and approved operations. The Queen read the article twice. She had agreed not to fight the order publicly, yet the story now presented her restraint as defeat. The humiliation mattered, because the allowance had always represented more than spending. It had symbolized status, independence, and her right to act without appearing dependent on Charles. William watched the morning coverage from his own residence. A broadcaster described the decision as a decisive public defeat for his stepmother, and suggested the prince had begun ruling before the throne was his. He switched off the television. The future king still believed the restriction was necessary, but he had never wanted the financial review to become a spectacle built around Camilla's embarrassment. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement through its communications office. The message said household funding was being modernized to strengthen transparency, responsibility, and public confidence. Transparency meant making financial decisions easier for the public to understand, and harder for private interests to hide. The words were careful. The reaction was not. A small crowd gathered outside the palace gates. One supporter raised a handwritten sign reading, "Duty before privilege." Another shouted that the Queen had been deliberately disrespected after years of service beside the king. Cameras captured both voices. turning a private family conflict into a national argument over fairness, loyalty, and the future shape of monarchy. Camilla surprised everyone. She approved the palace statement without demanding changes, and confirmed through a documented message to her household that every scheduled official engagement would continue under the revised arrangement. She would not disappear. She would not strike back. William received that confirmation in silence. Her restraint cleared the path for their final private meeting, where neither money nor public approval could settle what remained between them. Britain had chosen its headlines, but the true verdict would be delivered away from cameras, between the Queen and the future king. Camilla entered the final meeting without advisors, demands, or a document prepared for Charles to sign. William was already waiting. The reduced allowance remained in force. The annual review would proceed, and the lost privileges would not be restored. Nothing about the financial decision had changed. Yet something more important was about to be decided. Whether this confrontation would permanently divide the family, or whether the Queen and the future king could accept a new relationship built not on affection, but on limits. William confirmed the final terms one last time. Camilla's official duties would remain fully funded, but personal household expansion, unofficial travel, private hospitality, and exceptional expenses would now require independent approval. An annual review meant the arrangement would be examined every year to ensure the same rules continued to apply. This was no temporary punishment created during an argument. It was a permanent standard of accountability. Camilla listened without interrupting. Then she told William that the way he had announced the decision made her feel publicly diminished and privately abandoned. The Queen said the cut had not simply reduced money. It had exposed how quickly her place could be questioned when the balance of power shifted. William acknowledged the pain, but he did not apologize for establishing the limit. The prince told her that protecting the crown sometimes meant disappointing the people closest to it. He could not defend public responsibility while allowing private exceptions inside his own family. Camilla answered with quiet honesty. She now understood the difference between being loved by Charles and being protected from every consequence. The Queen revealed through a documented household statement that she had dismissed 2 advisors connected to the disputed spending and ordered full cooperation with the annual financial review. William then gave his own assurance. Her ceremonial standing, charitable work, official residence, security, and dignity as Queen would not be challenged. Ceremonial standing meant her formal place in royal duties and public events would remain secure. The restriction concerned authority over money, not her position beside the king. Camilla extended her hand. William accepted it. There was no embrace and no sentimental promise that everything had been repaired. Yet the struggle ended with recognition. Her allowance remained reduced. His decision remained final. Charles no longer had to choose between reversing the order and protecting his marriage. The crisis proved that Camilla could remain queen, but not without limits. William showed that the future reign would place accountability above private comfort. Charles learned that avoiding conflict could cause greater damage than facing it. The Queen lost financial independence, and part of the influence she had built, yet she preserved her role by accepting responsibility instead of continuing a battle she could not win. The monarchy emerged colder, stricter, and more disciplined, but also more secure. The allowance was reduced, the authority was redrawn, and the argument was finished. Camilla remained beside the king, while William made unmistakably clear that the future crown would answer to duty before privilege. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.